All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome to this episode where we are going to talk about treating contamination OCD. So my name is Matt Codde, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I specialize in working with people with OCD and anxiety. And on today's episode, I want to dive into the third part of our series here on contamination OCD. So in part one, we talked about, what contamination OCD is. And then in part two, we really dove into some of the different compulsions that people engage in. And then in this episode, what I want to talk about is the idea of basically how to ramp up and really supercharge someone's recovery process who has contamination OCD. And this one thing that I'm going to teach in this episode is so important to someone's success because, a lot of exposure and response prevention, what really differentiates someone who really sees a substantial improvement in recovery versus someone who kind of gets better is just this one thing that I'm about to cover. And it's the ability to attack their fear, right? And to be aggressive and attack the fear head on. And, there's research to support this. If you see that, two people get tossed into the same, stressful situation and one gets kind of thrown in against their will versus one who, actively chooses to go in, the body is just responding completely differently. Right. And I mean, anyone that trains martial arts can attest to this, as a jiu-jitsu practitioner, if I'm going to go into a role with someone, me, kind of taking this stance of like being defensive and letting the person attack me versus me being the attacker, the role just goes completely different, usually, right? Like, how I feel in the role anyway, is completely different because again, I'm choosing to engage in the stressful environment. And the same goes with exposure and response prevention, right? When we are just kind of walking through life and hoping that we don't get triggered, we're still in this like defensive posture, right? And that almost invites the fear to attack us in a certain way, if that makes sense. Versus when we do exposure and response prevention, one of the things that we need to start doing is attacking and purposely putting ourselves in those feared situations and then purposely making those situations worse. So with contamination OCD, the attack framework really looks like this. It's when we're going out and purposely touching contaminated objects. And then to top that off, we're spreading the contamination on purpose all over our bodies. Okay. So if I'm working with someone like, I was working with someone recently who had contamination OCD, and we would go over to like a mall or just kind of an outdoor area. And what we did is we walked around and purposely touched a bunch of contaminated items. Right? What were contaminated in that person's mind, right? So it might have been a bench, or it might have been a handrail, it might have been the edge of a trash can, or, just, shaking a person's hand in the store, whatever it was. The great part about anxiety and OCD is that it indirectly shows you how to get better. And what I mean by that is that it will tell you what it doesn't want you to do. And doing that is the thing that gets you better, right? So it indirectly points you in the direction, but if you just do the opposite of what it says many times, right? So if it's like, if you have social anxiety, it's like, oh, don't go to that party because, people are going to make fun of you. That's the exact party you should go to, right? And in all similarity with contamination OCD, the things that you think are contaminated are actually the things that are going to get you better, right? So if we go and touch those items and then again, forego all compulsions, right? Eliminate all compulsions, and that includes mental compulsions, physical compulsions, right? All that stuff, right? And we actively put ourselves in situations where we can seek out that fear and attack it. And then more importantly, spread the contamination. Well, what that does is it enhances the exposure. And more importantly, gives us more power. It empowers us, right? And essentially, like we're showing the fear. We're kind of standing right in front of it and like inviting it and bringing it on. And it's a very empowering experience if you've ever gone through this when facing a fear, is when you choose to face it. And then more importantly, like challenge it to even take it further, right? And when I watch people who are really getting better with OCD or like this particular fear, I mean, it's pretty amazing to watch someone who, when I first meet them, may be afraid to literally like come in the office, right? And sit in the couch, and they'll sit in like this like kind of weird posture. And then all of a sudden, watching that same person like walking into a gas station bathroom, like, okay, I'm going to touch all the handrails, and then spreading all the germs all over them, right? And it sounds weird when you say it, but it's like, man, the empowerment they feel because they're facing that fear and they're doing it on their terms. And more importantly, they're making it worse. And then we go and we spread the contaminations and, throughout their car and safe, any kind of safe areas. And that's really the second part of this, is just to make sure you don't have any safe areas, right? Because you'll naturally gravitate towards them. So what we do is we'll go to the person's house and we'll contaminate their bed, the couch, any area where they usually sit, because what we don't want is for there to be this safe space that they can go to. And instead, we just want to have them fully immersed in the contamination for as long of a period as possible. And that's why, like in an intensive or any kind of, ongoing treatment format, I'll have people, not shower for a day or two while doing these contaminations, just to make sure that there's enough time for the habituation process to set in. And what happens is eventually there's kind of this click that happens in their mind where they realize that the thing that they're afraid of isn't actually dangerous, right? Because they might be obsessing about it and they might be afraid of it. But eventually, if they don't do the compulsion, their body kind of calms down and their body and brain realize that they're not actually in danger. And that's the point of the ERP process, is to, achieve habituation to whatever the feared item or stimulus or situation is, right? And that's what we do. We progressively, go up and attack and attack and attack and attack. But of course, we do this in a hierarchy, in a structured way to help, promote success and empower the person, right? We're not starting up here, but the key that I really want to make in this particular episode, the key point I want to make is that when you go on the offensive, right? When you really take the aggressive stance and you challenge your fear and you go out and seek it and you go out in ways and see ways you can make it worse, that's when the tables really turn in this battle, right? And so it's not enough usually for the person just to remove compulsions, right? We need to become the aggressor eventually and the attacker in this particular fight against our fear and anxiety, right? Against OCD and anxiety, because when we do that, that's actually where I see things really turn around for people. And so that's what I wanted to talk about in this particular episode. Again, if you find this helpful, we really appreciate if you'd support us by liking and subscribing to our channels. We also have some additional resources on our website, restoredminds.com, to help you on this journey. Free guides, free assessments, where, you can, and then also our community, as well as our furthering your education, and knowledge on, learning the tools you really need to be successful. So please check that out. If this is something that you struggle with, because we are here to support you. And again, we want to get these tools to, to anyone who's struggling, because they work and you can recover. That's the real message that we want to drive home, is that anxiety, OCD, it's not a life sentence, right? It is something you can overcome. And in most of the things that most of the resources out there are teaching you backwards approaches. And so when you use the stuff that we're teaching here, you can really see exponential results in your life. So thank you so much for tuning in to this episode, and I hope that this series on contamination OCD was helpful for you if this is something you struggle with. And again, if you are looking for help, please, in the links below, down in the notes, we have some additional resources for you to help you on your journey. So thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Take care.